So, we start again with the last panel of our conference. And for this specific panel, I really want to thank deeply Michael, because we have been done together really huge work for this whole conference. So I know that there will be a big applause for the great people that we have in the panel, but first, also I would like all of you to make an applause for Michael. And we have now the panel Silence by Power, Anti-Corruption Journalist and Whistleblowing Facing Violence and Persecution. And this is also a topic that we at the Disruption Lab really care a lot. In the past, we have been also working a lot with whistleblowers. So I'm also really proud and honored to have here Stephanie Gibault, and also to have with us Pelin Unker, that's with their brave work, also is making a change, I would say, in the history of journalism. So thank you both for being here, because what you do is really strong, it is really important, especially because of the things that you go through. So thanks very much. And in the same panel, we will also have on video another really brave person from Azerbaijan, Khadija Ismailova, that cannot travel, cannot be with us, also because of her work. And Michael is going to say more about her. And we also will start the panel with showing the video of, about the award of Daphne Caruana Galizia. That is the person that was assassinated because of her work. So it's a panel in which we have really great women and important stories. And I'm really happy to introduce Michael now, that will moderate it. He's the communication officer at Transparency International and is working on project to enhance collaboration with investigative journalists and seek stronger protection for European whistleblowers. He studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London, and at the Bogazici University in Istanbul. So thank you very much. I leave the word to you, Michael, and again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I'd like to thank the entire Disruption Network Lab for all the incredible work that they've put into this event. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you all, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this collaboration through the rest of the series this year and next. As Tatiana was saying, the title of this panel is Silenced by Power, Anti-Corruption Journalists and Whistleblowers Facing Violence and Persecution. The stories and themes that we're going to hear about today tie into a lot of what's already been said over the past 2 days. They tie into questions about security of sources, protection of journalists working on large data leaks, revealing corruption and offshore schemes. It also ties into some of the legal and physical threats that we've been hearing about that come with that kind of activity, and also the role of partnerships and special projects in creating security and enhancing that work. We're very lucky to have three people that we'll hear firsthand from, Pelin and Stephanie, as well as Khadija through the video. Before that, we felt it was very important to start with, or to feature Daphne Caruana Galizia in this panel. As Tatiana was saying, Daphne was assassinated in October 2017 as a result of her reporting. Last year, Transparency International awarded the Anti-Corruption Award to Daphne, and as a result of, well, as part of that, we produced this video that we're going to play now, which was part of the posthumous award to Daphne. So I think we can roll that.
So my mother was the first woman in Malta's history to write a political column in the papers. She was also the first person to write using her own name rather than anonymously. So people wrote anonymously out of fear of violent reprisals at the time. It seems like any job, but to be able to do that in Malta required this incredible force of personality and this total conviction in what you considered right and what you considered wrong. It was always the same thing that motivated her. It was this sense of injustice and this sense of outrage, I think. So my mother grew up in a Malta that was really restricted. It was a really controlling state, and growing up in that environment, you either accept that as normal, as a way of living, and you sort of work with it or around it, or you just refuse to accept it. She refused to accept that it should be controlled by corrupt people and corrupt institutions, and she set out to change it. The main reason that she started that blog was she felt very restricted writing for a newspaper that, like most Maltese newspapers, is editorially quite conservative in what it allows its writers to say. So before my mother was killed on the 16th of October last year, she was working on 4 major stories. The people who my mother was reporting on, they're still there. They're still, they're still in government, they're still part of the state apparatus, and they have little interest in a much broader inquiry into what happened to my mother. So there are a lot of interests working against justice, unfortunately. Some of the people who my mother investigated as a journalist are now involved in her own murder investigation. So it's hard to have confidence that everyone has a shared interest in uncovering what really happened. We are hoping that this inquiry looks more seriously at what happened to Malta, so that it became a place where you can detonate a bomb powerful enough to take down a skyscraper on a Monday afternoon. And I think we in Malta really need to look at what happened, why we have become so systemically corrupt. We need to start recognizing corruption as really a major defining problem of our time. It's literally costing lives, and we need to talk more about this. Thankfully, more and more journalists, through the Daphne Project, they are banding together and they are taking a stand against these attacks. And I hope that governments and all institutions that can and should do something about this also join in this fight. I think that if my mother were alive to receive this award, she would feel a sense of relief, first of all, that other people also care. Other people care about her and her work, and other people care about the issues on which she's reporting. That she isn't, in fact, alone in this fight. I would want my mother to know just how important she is as an individual, just how incredibly powerful she is and continues to be, and that she really set an example not just for my brothers and me, but I think for a large part of the world. I would want her to know that she will continue to provide that example and that she will continue to be a deeply loved and valued human being.
We'd invited Matthew Caruana Galizia, the brother of Paul, who we saw in that video, and who was featured quite prominently in the Panama Papers documentary we screened yesterday. We'd invited him here today to talk more about his mother's work and the situation in Malta afterwards. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but he did send a statement some words from himself, his brothers Paul and Andrew, which I'll read out. It says, 18 months after our mother's murder, there is still no justice for her or for her stories. Journalists covering corruption and organized crime in Malta are now more at risk because they live and work in a country where a journalist has already been killed. In a global climate of deteriorating safety, there is nothing more urgent than state action to secure journalists' working environment. Full justice for our mother will help secure safety for all investigative journalists. A public inquiry into the circumstances of her assassination is the only way to rule out institutional neglect or state complicity in her murder. And it is the only way for the Maltese state to learn how to prevent another journalist being killed. There is no justification for delaying full justice for our mother, and there is no justification for leaving journalists at risk. There's really nothing I can kind of add to that. But I do just want to highlight one thing in the video that I think sets up some of the discussion we'll have with Pauline and Stephanie. And that's to do with collaboration and networks between allies in this area. Paul in the video mentioned the Daphne project, which was a collaboration by 45 journalists in 18 different news organizations working to complete the stories and the investigations that Daphne had started, and to make sure that justice is served for the people implicit in those. It also has another function, this kind of project, and that's to make silencing journalists or whistleblowers or truth tellers not only ineffective, but actually completely counterproductive. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and in a sense, that's, I think, part of the rationale of this panel. So without further ado, I'll introduce Pelin. Pelin Ünker is a freelance investigative journalist contributing to Deutsche Welle Türkçe. She also worked at Cumhuriyet newspaper in Turkey for 10 years, working mostly on Turkish economy, analyzing data, and investigating privatizations, tax evasion, public contracts, and economic regulations. As a member of ICIJ, Pelin worked on big investigations like the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, and her work has been awarded by Transparency International Turkey and the Progressive Journalists Association. Pelin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First, hi, thanks for coming. It's great to be here. Thanks for invitation again. I am a member of ICIJ of 1 year, and I worked on Panama Papers and Paradise Papers. Van Fitzgibbon from ICIJ called me and asked, do you have time for work on a new huge leak? I was pregnant and on my maternity leave, so I have a lot of time to investigate something. And I said yes, so I could find something critical. My big story is based on Paradise Papers, is about ex-Prime Minister's sons, companies in Malta, and now I will tell what this story about is. Yes. First, we look at numbers on Paradise Papers, and the data is 1.4 terabytes covered by Süddeutsche Zeitung and shared with ICIJ. And there are 382 journalists work on it from 96 media outlets and 67 countries. And there were 126 politicians from 47 countries, but only 2 politicians sued as journalists, and they are all from Turkey, not surprisingly. And who is Binali Yıldırım? Let's look at him. Yıldırım is a long-standing and faithful ally of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. When the system changed in the country. His duty is over, but he was so happy to be last prime minister of Turkey. He's proud of that. And his sons have, Erkam Yıldırım and Bülent Yıldırım have 5 companies in Malta. All of them are shipping companies. Dertel Shipping, Nova Warrior, Havkebay Marine, Black Eagle, and South Seas Shipping. But not only brothers were in the league. Binali Yıldırım's uncle and nephew also was in Malta. And the uncle have 2 companies in Malta. His nephew also a director of 4 other companies. We can say at the end their full family are there, and like ship tycoon. But uncle and nephew didn't sue me, only the sons and Binali Yıldırım sue me. And why is Malta? Because Malta has a far lower corporate tax rate than Turkey. The tax rate is about 5%. In Turkey, it is 25%. And so they are in there. And when we look at Binali Yıldırım's Twitter account, we are very surprised. We were, because his account, he's following 4 accounts. One of them is AKP official account, the other one presidency official account, and of course Recep Tayyip Erdogan's accounts. And the last one is the president of Malta, Maria Luiza Calero. So this shows why Malta is very important for the family also. And after the publication, Binali Yıldırım made a statement to the press, and he said about Operation His Sons in Malta, he said, this is an international job, and his sons didn't win any tenders from government. He also called investigation for business operation of sons. Sorry. And when he showed the document from 2008, he said his sons are tax champions in Turkey. But I want to call their firms in Turkey from the number that is registered of Istanbul Chamber of Commerce. The man on the phone said it is a supermarket which sells construction materials. And so they don't even have a registered number. Yes, on the other side, Erkam Yıldırım had received a tender from State through his company in Malta. This company was Nova Warrior Limited. And on the document, we can see his signing documents as a behalf of South Seas Shipping. And South Seas Shipping is the owner of Nova Warrior Limited. And when we look at the International Maritime Organization records, we saw that Nova Warrior was using the same address with a Turkish firm called Oras Denizcilik. And when we look at the tender records from Turkish government, we saw that Oras Denizcilik had won a research and shipping-related tender from Turkish government in 2017. And it is amount of almost $7 million. And Binali Yıldırım was also in the shipping business before entered politics. His business partner was Salih Zeki Çakır. And surprise, Oras Denizcilik is owned by Salih Zeki Çakır. In the end, no investigation was opened for business operations of sons. And in the parliament, motions by opposition parties demanding an investigation into Turkish politicians accounts in tax havens, as revealed by Paradise Papers, was rejected by AKP votes. But this is not the only reaction of AKP about tax havens in the parliament. In Turkey, we have a state institution called MASAK. It means Financial Crimes Investigation Board. And it researches financial crimes and publishes regulations on prevention of money laundering and financing terrorism. 12 years ago, MASAK stated that there are tax havens and jurisdictions like Malta, Cyprus, and MASAK requests that from government to pass a law and announce these jurisdictions or tax havens. But nothing happened. We can see the reason now, because AKP was the ruling party during that time, and the head of the cabinet, Binali Yıldırım's family, is Daesh. And so his family profited from the fact he didn't pass the law. And why must be Turkish people interested in this story? In Turkey, there is a huge economic crisis, and the solution is always high tax rates. When we have to pay high levels of taxes, the prime minister's sons not have to, they can avoid to pay taxes. And on the other side, government always called foreign investors to invest our country, and we have, because Turkey has a big saving gap, and always the reason not to do social investments is this. If some allies don't put their money to tax havens, jurisdictions like Malta or Cyprus, the government can find enough money to pay for healthcare or education, can do more social spendings. That's why everyone must fight against this. In the end, nothing changed after these publications, and I was prosecuted on charges of insult and defamation. I fined almost 9,000 liras and sentenced to 13 months and 15 days. In other case, I am also punished by a pecuniary penalty and 30,000 liras for violating the personal rights of Yıldırım family. I was sentenced to 30 months earlier this year, and in the indictments it says, I will continue to commit criminal act and break law. It means I will continue to do my job as a journalist, because in my case the accusation is against journalism. Because there is no lie, I didn't anything unreal. Binali Yıldırım had already accepted these companies are real, and it's about ethics of journalism. But I'm not a brave person or a superhero, because I do only my job as a journalist, what other journalists do. In Turkey, these trials like that are aimed at intimidating us, but journalists must continue their jobs in Turkey too. In the indictment, they blame me for drawing tax havens as a financial crime, and it's true, this is legal in Turkey, but what I did is opening a discussion whether this is ethical. My case is now on appeal court. We are waiting the final decision. Although there was no evidence about accusations like that, appeal court usually ruled the original trial was lawful and approved the convictions like an automatic mechanism. This situation tells us that independence of institution is so important, because in Turkey there is no independent judge, and so there is no justice. And last, I said before, 2 politicians sued me because of my stories basis of Paradise Papers. And there was also another case, the 3rd case against me. I also discovered that Serhat Albayrak, the brother of Berat Albayrak, which is son-in-law of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, are in the leaks too. They are linked to they have some companies and linked to a Turkish conglomerate called Çalık Holding. It was the same judge in the case, and the accusation was also same. It was again defamation, and so we accepted the same decision in the end. But we were lucky because the judge had forgotten to admit the indictment in time. And she dismissed it 4 months for preparing the indictment. And so she announced the decision sadly. She said to Albayrak's and Çalık lawyers, I am sorry about that. I have to take this decision. And the charge against me was dropped in that case. Yes, but this is not the worst thing for a journalist, I think. The worst thing for a journalist, in my opinion, an investigation that you prepared for months must reach the large masses. But if you want to read my stories in Turkey, you see this page because the government blocked access of stories in a few days. Yes, this shows again why collaboration is so important. The governments can block access to news stories, but stories don't disappear. There are a lot of newspapers that publish these stories too in the world. And lastly, thanks to Frederick Obermeyer and Süddeutsche Zeitung, ICIJ, and of course NGOs supporting me. Classically, journalism is not a crime. And I know, as a journalist, I am not alone. We can make our world better together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pelin, for that. And just before, Stephanie, your presentation, I just have a couple of questions I wanted to ask just now. What's it like, I mean, obviously working in Turkey as an investigative journalist is incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging for a variety of ways. I mean, the lack of potential impact, the government's control over media, the court cases, but I was curious that in the absence of leaks like the Paradise Papers, or other troves of documents like that, how do you work? How are you able to work in Turkey? What's the environment like for like the availability of records to do this kind of work there? How easy is it to access records? Are there registries for company information, the kinds of resources that you rely on for investigative journalism? What are the other challenges, I guess, apart from the legal ones?
Yes, a little bit more difficult, we can say, because you cannot reach some companies from the official government accounts, and so you must do something different about for investigating it. And do double check about that because I said there was no phone number in Istanbul Commerce and so people can do some things illegal very easily in Turkey, and it's another challenge for journalists in Turkey. We can say we can't reach. We don't trust the officials what we give us. It can be a lie because the governments always change the system, and the data's always changed, and we cannot see the data. If we can see the data now, on the other day we cannot see this data. That's the challenges for us. I hope I can I can tell about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and yeah, I think it really speaks volumes to the not the challenges, but the incredible work that you've been doing there. Stephanie, I'll hand over to Stephanie Gibault. Stephanie Gibault was working at UBS Bank in France for 12 years before blowing the whistle on offshore schemes there. She's the author of the book Whistleblowers, The Manhunt, published in 2017 with an introduction by Julian Assange. In 2018, she was a jury member of the GUE NGL Award in honor of Daphne Caruana Galizia, and will also be a jury member in 2019. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Before I start, I would like to thank Tatiana and the whole team for inviting me. As I worked for event management, I know exactly the amount of stress, the amount of work, and that details matter. So thank you very much. And thank you for the people who are in the room, actually, because I remember doing a couple of presentations a couple of years ago with whistleblowers, and we were 2 or 3 on stage, and there was only 1 person in the room. So it means that somehow, year after year, month after month, week after week, whistleblowers and journalists and associations have helped raise awareness about the importance of hidden information. So my story is is the story that you would not even think of for your worst enemy. It's been lasting for 12 years now, starting in 2007, 2008. And the first speech I gave publicly in, I don't know if you know of TEDx. I did a TEDx, but before that I did something in French called l'échappée volée, which is the same thing, you are alone on stage, and I asked the people who had an offshore account, and obviously no one put their hand up, and I said, but it's not necessary to go to Switzerland or to the Cayman Islands or to go to Jersey or to London or to Hong Kong. You just go down the street and there you go. So my story is the following. I was working for UBS, United Banks of Switzerland, in Paris, and I was the public relation manager. Most of my time and budgets were devoted to the organization of events, of platforms for clients and prospects, potential clients. And UBS opened in Paris first, and then they developed the network of offices all over the country. And my job was to provide to the bankers the opportunity to meet with people and obviously to have new clients at the bank. For all of you who work in events management, what you have to do is to make sure that the brand, and for me it was the 3 letters of the bank and the 3 keys of the UBS, to be in people's mind whenever they were talking about their money, which means that instead of thinking of Deutsche Bank, of BNP Paribas, they would think UBS. So during 10 years, my job was to organize those platforms, which could be sport events, like boxes in football stadiums, in tennis tournaments, like private evenings at the opera. Because the problem with this type of clients, prospects, is that they can buy everything they want. So the main issue I had to face was to provide them with events that money cannot buy. So you talk here about emotion. So what is emotion? It's like a private dinner with whoever singer. It's top-notch events that you cannot get if you are not UBS. For example, I don't know if one of you here has a Ferrari. If you own a Ferrari, you cannot go and drive your Ferrari in Maranello. It's impossible. But with UBS, you can. So you see, this is kind of details I was working on. So I was working like a dog because I had up to 100 events to organize per year. So can you imagine what it is? It's like I was seeing hotel rooms and planes and trains, much more than I was seeing my own kids, to make this bank be the most renowned bank in my country, in France. And one day, in 2008, my new boss entered my office like a crazy one, explaining to me that a search had taken place in the office of the general manager, and she was asking me to delete all the files, all the archives I had about the events I had organized since I joined the bank 10 years ago. So for me, it sounded quite weird, and I didn't really pay attention to what she asked me. I was really anxious about the search. What is the search about? What? When a search takes place in the office of a general manager, obviously there is something weird. But as I was busy organizing an event with my colleagues in Geneva, I didn't really pay attention to what she said. And then the story started. She came back in the days and weeks that followed, asking me if I had deleted those computer archives, and she asked me to delete the contents of my paper archives, which is, you know, you were talking about your job, for example. It's as if you had your manager coming to your office and asking you to delete all the contents of all the articles you had been written since you were a journalist. Somehow it doesn't make sense. And I just felt by that time that they wanted to get rid of me. Why? Was I, you know, not efficient anymore? Was I to be replaced by someone who would be more accurate? Well, anyway, pressure started, and for the ones of you who have heard about harassment, I wish you don't have to go through that, because it turns your life into a nightmare. I had a depression, obviously, and it took my whole life away, because we're talking here about whistleblowing. So I went and talked to all the managers of the bank in Paris, to the HR manager, to the head of legal and compliance, to the president, and to all the ones I had to refer to, and they were telling me that, you know, I was tired, that everyone was complaining about my behavior, that I was making up a story, because I joined the bank when it opened in Paris. So I knew all the people who arrived. And in 2008, there were 500 people at the bank, namely 150 of them were my internal clients, the bankers, whom I had to please with those events. And some of them heard about the instructions I had to delete my files. And they are the ones who explained to me what my job was made for. As silly as I was and as naive as I was, because if you go back 2008, who was talking about tax evasion? Who was talking about tax paradises? Who was talking about the crucial role of Switzerland within Europe? Who was talking about Luxembourg, Ireland, Jersey, the Cayman Islands, etc.? Nobody. But all of a sudden, with the crisis in 2008, you had so many other scandals about UBS, all of them relating to tax evasion, tax paradises, and obviously the role of banks. tax evasion couldn't exist if there were no banks, if there were no bank transfers, no bank wires. So in 2008, after having this instruction to delete my files, which I never did, I had those bankers explaining to me that my job, which was a kind of a PR representing the image of the bank, helped the wealthy clients to open offshore accounts in Switzerland. And I was like, but I know, because Swiss bankers are part of our commercial teams. They can come and see their clients here in Paris on the dedicated floor. And I organize all the events with Geneva. So on all the golf tournaments, whatever I was organizing, there were Swiss bankers. What is the problem? We refer to the Banque de France. We have our own authorities. If there had been anything wrong, obviously the authorities, the Banque de France and all the investigating companies would have heard about that. And this is somehow the other side of the coin. And you all talked about it, Frederick, Nicolas yesterday, etc., is that on one side you have banks helping customers, clients to evade taxes, but on the other side you have governments and administrations who close their eyes and who somehow are extremely, how to put that, keen on closing their eyes for reasons you have all explained since yesterday. So, to make a long story short, because I can talk for 6 months, I wrote 2 books about it. So my life at UBS as of 2008 started to be a nightmare. The only thing I was able to do, because I was like, you know, an animal being tracked, I was extremely stressed. And to go back to a subject where Frederick talked earlier, I don't know where Frederick is. Where's Frederick? He's not here. I fully understand why John Doe is John Doe and we cannot know who he or she is. Because being a whistleblower, the media, and if there are journalists here, I would be interested in talking about that. It's very important. It's not someone who wants to be in the media and wants to become a hero. We have information to provide because it's of general interest. We are not talking about being, you know, like in a movie or like in a comic book, because when you watch a movie, then you have a remote control and the movie is over. When you close a book, the story is over. But then it's our lives being totally hijacked by information being published. I said to a conference earlier this year, when a whistleblower meets a journalist, it's exactly like a patient with a cancer would meet with a surgeon. Somehow the journalist has a life between his or her hands. So nowadays things have things are a little bit better, but 12 years ago, I can tell you that this was absolutely unknown from everyone. So anyway, in 2008, I didn't delete those information. I had those bankers explaining to me that my job was helping French clients to open bank accounts in Switzerland, which were undeclared up to 95%, and that obviously it's illicit. So I was somehow trapped with an information, because as long as I didn't know, I obviously could not do anything. But I was a single mother raising my kids, and I was like, but what if the police comes one morning at home and takes me away in front of my kids at 5 a.m. with handcuffs? So I was in a state of panic, saying like, okay, I have everyone against me at the bank, including the bankers, obviously. I have no support from the elected members, from the personnel. I was myself an elected member of the personnel, so I ask all the questions to management. And they were kind enough to send letters to each of the management saying, this is Stephanie Gibault's talk, we have nothing to do about that. You know how people turn their backs. So I went and saw the Ministry of Labor, because in France it's supposed to be quite powerful. And after 6 months meeting one of the ladies, she said to me, Madame Gibault, you're going to fill in a complaint against your employer. I was like, what? Yeah, you are going to fill in a complaint for tax evasion, money laundering, double accounting, well, everything you've been telling me for 6 months. But I was like, are you kidding me? I'm a single mother. The only income I have is my salary. What is going to happen to me? And the answer I got was like, we are here to protect you, which is very important. And so I remember, for the ones who know Paris, it's on l'île de la Cité. I arrived there on a December morning, I remember, with a pile of documents as high as that. And by that time, I was still thinking like, okay, it's going to take 6 months. Then the bank is going to go to court, all the managers are going to be punished, and I'm going to have another life because what I'm saying is true. And my story is just making mistakes everywhere, because I was the first one going to court in 2010, where I was still an employee of the bank, because obviously justice is a mean of retaliation. When you are a single person, when you are a citizen, going to court is something extraordinarily violent, especially if you are honest, especially if you tell the truth. And I had the general manager, remember, behind my back, who was jumping like a kangaroo, saying, this woman is a liar, we've never helped client evading taxes, all our auditors, I don't know who talked about the PwC and Deloitte and the other audit companies earlier today. Well, anyway, so this was one of the first terrifying story I had to leave. But the following year, I was still at the bank, still harassed, still in a cupboard, because the Ministry of Labor refused my being made redundant, because UBS tried in 2009 to make me redundant. She refused, and she let me in a bank that was frauding, helping clients evade taxes, the fraud of which I blew the whistle on. So somehow it's something totally unbelievable. And on my way to tennis tournament, the Roland Garros tennis tournament in 2011, I got a call on my cell phone, private number. It was the voice of a lady who said to me something where I understood that she was working for the Ministry of Finances and that she wanted to see me. And I was quite surprised. I said, well, I'm working on the tournament. It's 2 weeks. I work weekends, evenings, bank holidays. I'm not available. And she said, yes, it's very important. So I met this woman, and this is where another kind of nightmare started. These people explained to me, because she was accompanied by other people, they explained to me that they were part of a customs department within the Ministry of Finances, and that fraud at UBS continued. And I was like, but are you kidding me? I blew the whistle instantly. I've been retaliated for 3 years. They took my job away. They give it to a girl who's half my age because her parents have bank accounts at UBS Geneva. And I went through a depression, and as I am an elected member of the personnel, they asked us to sign a new document saying that the foreign bankers cannot visit their clients within our premises anymore. And I am going to be in Roland Garros, and I can tell you I have no Swiss banker on the list of guests. And they said to me, we are going to follow you during 2 weeks, and we are going to have photographers and teams who are going to follow you everywhere you go. And I was like, but you're mad. Fraud has stopped, I'm sure. And to make a long story short, during a whole year, even 15 months after this tournament, I had to go regularly to their offices and bring, upon their request, and this is obviously very important, information belonging to the servers of the bank, which meant that it was information that was not necessarily belonging to me at marketing, communication, and events. I guess UBS, who by that time was hacking my phone and who had the possibility at least to hack my phone and my emails and etc., enjoyed that to kick me out of the bank. And I left the bank. I was like, you know, a nobody. And I was thinking that I would, you know, find a job after I would recover. And suddenly, the story reached the media. So now, in 2019, I have two questions. Who gave my name to those people in the Ministry of Finances? But who gave my name to the media? Who has leaked my name? If I was called Jennifer Smith, I would have found a job. Being called Stephanie Gibault with this story glued on me as if I had never been anyone in my life but the UBS whistleblower, took my whole life away. I took UBS to court in 2015 regarding the harassment I suffered. And another part of the terrible violence of what whistleblowers do is that I won versus UBS. It was a 3-year trial. But somehow the money I made was not even the amount of what I had to pay the lawyers. So somehow it's also part of very strategic harassment. But worse than that, the week after I went to court, we got the judgment, my lawyer called me and said he had just spoken to UBS. And I was really wondering why. Because UBS filled in another complaint against me for defamation for my first book. Because I published the first book explaining everything I just talked to you about in details. And I was like, and what do they want? It's even worse enough. And he said, you are going to remove the complaint you filled in 2009 against the bank, and they will remove this complaint against you. And they will write to you a check of whether it is 50 or 100,000 euros. And I was like, but when a lawyer says that to you, you can also wonder what ethics is, because we're here to talk about whistleblowing, so ethical procedures within banks. But when you see how ethical lawyers can also be when you are somehow the scapegoat or you are being treated as if you can be paid, you can get money for your information, there is some, for justice and legal information, it's absolutely crazy. So I refused. And 2016, thanks to the Panama Papers, here we are again, I was invited by France Télévisions, which I think is one of the ICIG media member. And they had invited the Minister of Finances, called Michel Sapin, for the ones who know who Michel Sapin is. And I faced the Minister of Finances. It's totally, my life is totally crazy. And behind me, I had a screen like that with the Panama Papers, and it was whichever account, UBS, Panama Papers, you know, whichever account, UBS, 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 UBS. And I was like, what? Everything goes around. Everything is linked. It's because I had obviously nothing to do with the Panama Papers. And the Minister of Finances, who was here, like every minister, says, I want to protect whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are the heroes of modern times. I am going to pass a law, so now it's called the Sapin law in France, to protect people like Stéphanie Gibault. And the journalist said, but what are you going to do to her? How are you going to help her? She's going to be kicked out of her apartment. She hasn't had incomes for 5 years, and she's not going to see her kids anymore. And he answered, but I am unable to do anything. So this is, and then I will stop talking because I can talk for years, but you know, we are here for the title, which is Confronting Hidden Money and Power. And this is France, the neighbor country, in the center of Europe, which is not supposed to be a tax haven. And somehow, to close the story, I had to go to court last year, again, for the defamation. And UBS this year in France got the biggest fine ever, the amount of which is 4.5 billion euros. So all the economic media have talked about that. But the Ministry of Finances still does not want to recognize the work I had done for them, which means that those past 3 years, I had to take the state to court. So now my enemy is not even UBS. My enemy is the French state, which made me work for them, which made my whole life collapse, and which brought 4.5 billion euros in justice and 4.7 billion euros from hidden money that came back to the Ministry of Finances. And for that, you are treated as if you were Mr. Nobody. And I think this is the big conclusion of the thing, whereas there are laws being passed. I don't know who talked about the Brussels law earlier today, but in France we have this Sapin law. We've been having it for 3 years. And obviously all the whistleblowers do not enter in the frame of a frame law. There always is something for us not to somehow match the requirements of what the justice would want. And this is a very tricky game because there is no one to help. There is absolutely no one to help. And this is what everyone has to keep in mind. So among the solutions, obviously ethics is supposed to be everywhere, with journalists, with associations, with banks, definitely, but with our civil servants, our top civil servants, and our top politicians, because it just blows away the life of someone, and obviously our kids, our family, and whereas everyone should be surprised and support us, whistleblowers all are extremely isolated. I just published a book called Whistleblowers, the Manhunt, because all the whistleblowers I met, whether they are in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, in Belgium, here in Germany, and in the US, whatever the laws are, they all suffer the same retaliation. You know, England, for example, and I will stop on that, is supposed to have the best laws to protect whistleblowers. And we have Julian Assange, who's been locked in the embassy of Ecuador for more than 6 years. The cases in the US are extremely severe as well, knowing that the laws have been existing and it's in the Constitution to blow the whistle in the United States. I stop here because I can.
Thank you, Stephanie. I know there's a lot more that you could say, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that from the audience that people would like to ask. Before we go to that, we'll play the video from Khadija Ismailova from Azerbaijan. And I think your story is, in a lot of ways, the story of an individual up against incredibly powerful forces all around you. And I think we'll see something similar from Khadija in her case just now.
Dear friends and colleagues, first of all, I want to thank you for having me here. I'm one of more than 10 Azerbaijani journalists who are banned from traveling now, and that's why I couldn't be there in person. So I want to start my speech with good news. 15 years ago, the world was much bigger for a journalist based in Azerbaijan. We lacked tools and skills to investigate foreign investors and companies appearing in our market, enjoying favorable position in the economy, winning public bids, acquiring licenses which were denied to their competitors. In 2008, when I was working together with one of our trainees on the story about telecom companies' ownership, we had to leave it unfinished. The real owners were 3 Panamanian companies. We didn't know how to dig further, and we stopped. In 2011, when I was already part of OCCRP team, they taught me how to use the scraped database, by the way, many thanks to Dan O'Hugan who scraped it, and dig for more information in Panamanian registry. I found the owners of the 3 Panamanian companies, which I was not able to identify back in 2008. The companies were owned by President Aliyev's daughters. This was years before Panama Papers hit the world, and the ruling family didn't expect that once closed databases will be accessible to journalists. They didn't use proxies for opening companies in Panama. Their own names were there. It was March 2012 when I was working on several other stories. I've learned that there was a hidden camera in my bedroom in the previous apartment. I have learned it through the blackmail letter, which ordered me to behave. I didn't. I did my own research and even found a man who installed the special cable connecting the cameras and the telephone company. They needed stable connection for continuing transmission. The serviceman who did the job was employee of the state-run telephone company. He said it was the order from the work and remembered the time of the work. 1st or 2nd Saturday of July, few days after the first Panama story, Azerphone story. This is just one example how collaboration helped journalists to uncover the highest level of corruption in the country. But then it was also an example of how the state structures and ruling elite worked together, hand in hand, to punish that journalist by intrusion into privacy, blackmail, and smear campaign. This February, I won the case in the European Court, proving that the government blocked the investigation of the crime against me. However, I'm yet to achieve justice in this case. This very case is also an anecdotic example of how the government used anti-terror legislation to establish the system ensuring full cooperation of telephone companies with special services, even when they didn't have court orders for surveillance. I continued to work together with colleagues in Azerbaijan and OCCRP, uncovering first families, businesses in construction, other telephone companies, finding their assets in different countries. In 2014, the story proving that the ruling family was in fact partner of Telia Sonera in another mobile telecom company was the last one before my arrest. I found First Family's shares in the largest telecom company. Shares were hidden behind Panamanian companies again. This story was also continued by colleagues in OCCRP while I was in jail. They discovered that Telia Sonera in fact paid for those shares, bought them for the ruling family. This was one of the dozens of investigations carried out by my colleagues while I was in prison, within the special project, Khadija project, in order to prove that silencing one doesn't silence all. About arrest, the charges were somewhat ironic. I had feeling that the ruling regime is projecting their crimes on me. After a year and a half of prison and trials, Supreme Court left me with 2 of those charges, convicted. illegal entrepreneurship, for working for foreign media as a freelancer without accreditation in the foreign ministry. The charge was not based on any law requiring that accreditation, but I could not have the court to hear this argument. It also shows that the government considers journalism as a licensed activity. Since my release, I wrote to foreign ministry to seek a procedure on how a freelancer should be accredited. No response was given to me. Tax evasion. Second charge was implying that the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, a non-profit US Congress-funded organization, is supposed to pay profit tax. And because I was their bureau chief for 2.5 years in the past, I was responsible for those taxes. That's what the court said. Without going into details of the case against Radio Free Europe, I want to mention another irony. The official excuse for the case came from Azerbaijan's anti-money laundering authority. They applied to Prosecutor General's office saying that they suspect money laundering is taking place in several civil society organizations and Radio Free Europe. With that one letter, a criminal case had been launched, sweeping the independent human rights community of Azerbaijan. In 2013 and 2014, number of organizations were raided, NGO leaders, human rights lawyers were arrested with trumped-up charges. The government investigators could not prove any of those allegations, and actually, European Court has already decided on 2 of those cases that the arrests and criminal prosecution was politically motivated. This umbrella case, which was what government declared anti-money laundering operation, was in fact the political crackdown against civil society. The financial case against me was one of many criminal prosecutions carried out under the same operation. The government and parliament in Azerbaijan also acted together to close access to information for investigative journalists. Since 2012, ownership of the companies is a commercial secret in Azerbaijan. In coming days, Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe will discuss the money laundering efforts of the member states. The urgency of this discussion is prompted by the investigations carried out by journalists. Journalists of OCCRP, Berlingske, Guardian, and a number of other outlets discovered money laundering schemes, so-called laundromat. Investigations revealed hundreds of billions worth illegal transactions. I was part of that investigation. So what did that investigation reveal? 2.9 billion US dollars have been handled by complex operations of the money laundering machine. Between 2012 and 2014, Azerbaijani ruling elite has pumped millions through 4 UK companies and their accounts in Estonian branch of the Danske Bank. What the money was for? Ministers sent their siblings petty cash. Hundreds of millions of dollars were transferred to offshore. European politicians were bribed, and so on. Italian Member of Parliament Luca Volonte received more than 2 million euros to his account through the same money laundering scheme. The money originated from funds of Bulk Telecom LLC, a Baku-based limited liability company. OCCRP has revealed that the owner of the company when the transactions took place was Rasim Asadov, close friend of Aliyev family and business partner of the First Lady's cousin Mir Jalal Pashayev. Laundromat investigations revealed that the company, Bulk Telecom LLC, used 2 laundromat companies and their accounts to transfer more than 1.4 billion US dollars. 4 UK companies were officially owned by Azerbaijani individuals, one of them being an assistant in the bank, another one a driver in another bank. The real owners of the accounts are yet to be identified, and the Azerbaijani government takes zero attempt to investigate the matter. Not surprising considering who were the beneficiaries of the money laundering transactions. Speaking of fighting corruption, the laundromat was also used by Chief Anti-Corruption Officer's family, companies owned by sons of Deputy Chief of the Anti-Corruption Commission, Ali Nagiev, transferred through Metastar Invest, one of 4 laundromat companies, at least 1.5 million US dollars. One of the most interesting cases is the Rosoboron export payments. The Russian arm exporter transferred around $29 million into the Metastar accounts in 2012. Part of the money landed in accounts of the company named Velasco in Cyprus and Hungary. The company, which received through Metastar about $9 million is owned by Orhan Eyüpov. Coincidentally, Orhan's father, Vice Prime Minister Yaqub Eyüpov, was key negotiator of the arm deal between Azerbaijan and Russia prior to transactions. The deal was widely criticized in media due to low quality and outdated nature of obtained arms. Small but interesting detail, Vice Prime Minister's health bills in the United States and Germany were also handled by Metastar Invest, the laundromat company. Azerbaijani officials prefer having healthcare services in Europe, as the country's healthcare system is destroyed by corruption and monopolies. The officials in presidential administration were also aware of the money laundering companies. Azer Gasimov, the press secretary of President Aliyev, received 4 installments worth $130,000 through the scheme. Lobby firms in the United States and Germany were in the receiving end of the money laundering scheme as well, but also United Nations. Husband of then UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova also received laundromat payments. Eduard Lindner, German politician very well known in Azerbaijan for his restless support to ruling regime, also received a lot of money. Money landed in Lindner's accounts were later distributed to other politicians, including Karen Strens, a Christian Democrat member of parliament then, and Alain de Steyck, Belgian MP. As I told earlier, Azerbaijani government made zero attempt to act upon these findings. No one is prosecuted. None of the officials have been questioned. Zero responsibility. While anti-money laundering agency was initiating a crackdown against civil society and journalists in 2013 and 2014, these schemes were operating in the heart of the capital, Baku. When law enforcement were busy making up cases against dozens of journalists, the public funds were siphoned through the real criminal hands. Until recently, there were 10 journalists behind bars. Now we have 4 remaining in prison. Dozens are banned from travel with bogus excuses. Azerbaijani government successfully cooperated with Georgian government for abducting and arresting investigative journalist Afgan Mukhtarli 2 years ago. However, since 2005, the two governments cannot cooperate to investigate assassination of Elmar Huseynov, another journalist. The editor of Monitor magazine, Elmar Huseynov, was killed with 5 bullets in his mouth after publication of series of investigations about the ruling family. His alleged assassins are Georgian citizens, and the Azerbaijani government doesn't find a way to request them from Georgia or to question them in Tbilisi. Impunity for criminals in office and punishment of truth tellers pushes people into hopelessness and subsequently to religious groups who promise that the bad deeds and good deeds will be duly rewarded in the other world. There is a hope, though. There is a chance that the international justice may help to work. Usually, prosecutors don't act when we uncover corruption in Azerbaijan. Laundromat investigation was the first time when I could see direct impact of our investigative work, although it happened only on European ends of the money laundering scheme. Criminal cases were launched in Europe, banks lost their licenses in Europe, prosecutors acted against money launderers in Europe, politicians lost their seats in parliament and became subject for anti-corruption investigation in Europe. Thanks to the fact that journalists and activists, namely Transparency International, worked together to reveal and then bring justice to the cases, we saw movement. It is important to build on this moment. Hopefully, international organizations, which my country is a member of, will demand actions. They will demand to bring justice to real corruption cases in Azerbaijan, and they will demand Azerbaijani authorities to open the commercial registers for public watch. And there will be a day when those who beat, kill, blackmail, or arrest journalists will not enjoy impunity. Thank you.
Before we open it up to the floor for questions, I'd like to come back to you, Stephanie, about something that, well, at the start of that video, Khadija talked about how the world has become a smaller place for journalists like her working in Azerbaijan, that the network opportunities, the collaboration are there. As a whistleblower, what are in the legal cases that you're going through, the persecution you're facing, what are the networks, what are the support mechanisms that you're able to draw from? Are there any, or do you remain isolated as a whistleblower?
Oh yeah, for 10 years it's been awfully, I mean, it's loneliness. And somehow the cases are so tough in a country like France, because somehow it's terrible what the lady just said, but as we are in Europe, we were not expecting this at all. We were expecting support. We're expecting, you know, people to, and especially the administrations, to come with us to court or to forbid that those banks take us to court. And somehow, no. This is why we tried to gather whistleblowers in France twice, in 2014 and 2016. And many people have sneaked in everywhere to make sure that this would not happen. This is why I published this book, just for everyone to know that if we gather, it's going to make things extremely more simple for everyone. Because everything we say is always linked to the top politicians. I didn't have time to say, but in 2013 in France, we had a crazy scandal hitting the news with the Minister of Budget, who was himself fighting tax evasion, who had offshore bank accounts with UBS in Geneva. So obviously no one understands that this is directly linked to my case. It was at UBS again. As I said, UBS was in the Panama Papers, it was in the Paradise Papers. So everywhere you find, well, your image of Jersey was UBS as well. It's a little world where everyone is connected. So we are the 99%. If we are united, then we are going to be much stronger because we are the people.
And Pedline, if I can put a similar question to you regarding the difference that collaborative work makes. I mean, working in the country that's the biggest jailer of journalists in the world, and coming up with working on an investigation like the Paradise Papers. What was going through your head in the lead up to the publication and the balance of what might come at you as negative consequences, but the support that was also there? How much does that help you go forward with that process, that investigation?
I think most important thing is collaboration again, because Daphne project is a good example for it. You can silence the journalists, but you cannot silence the news stories. And so the other thing is, other important thing is, for supporting is very important, and you must feel you cannot lonely when you something critical, and support for Turkey, for example, support from European Union is very important, because European Union can change Turkish government decisions, it can be pressure on it like that, I think. But on the other side, I must say something because I think we must do, as journalists in Turkey, the journalists also must do something locally, because some people call themselves journalists and doing only what government wants, and this is not. This must be changed, I think, first, and then we can change by supporting from the other countries.
Excuse me. I'll open it up for questions from the floor. Any questions for Pauline and Stephanie? In the front here.
So yeah, thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask about the defamation laws that were mentioned in both cases as tools to crack down on both whistleblowers and journalists, and if you had any thoughts on just what is the way forward with those in terms of like preventing that abuse of defamation laws, and what could possibly be done to sort of at a systemic sort of policy level to prevent that kind of abuse of power using legislation.
In my case, the accusation was defamation, but there is no lie in my story. And in the indictment, they said people knows tax havens and these jurisdictions is illegal. And so, if you say in your story, if you can say in your story that is legal in Turkey, people don't understand this, and people will think they are doing a bad job in other countries, and so that's the reason of the defamation. Is very strange for this, because the prime minister accepts the companies. Yes, we have my sons. He says, yes, my sons had these companies, and then they said I attacked their personal rights, and these accusations came.
Is it true that one of the laws used was to do with defamation of a public official? The politicians have particular protection under the law as well in Turkey, I believe.
The politicians usually use these decisions because the judges are not independent in Turkey, and always when as a journalist, when you make a critical story, after that we know that an accusation will come after this story, and journalists in Turkey are always in courts. We are seeing each other in courts, and like a meeting room now, and not only journalists, academicians, and people from civil society, and lawyers also in the courts. We can say if you do a great job, if you are doing your job well, it can be you are facing these problems like that, and it's we can say it is an award from government.
Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
This is a complicated question. If I take my case, in 2010 in France, no one had ever heard the word whistleblower. Whistleblower came into people's mind thanks to the media as of 2014. So I did not know at all what I was facing. And obviously the big mistake I made is, because you cannot go to court if you don't have a lawyer, is to take a lawyer who was a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, and who obviously did not anticipate the whole thing I told you, and the massive fraud ever, because the UBS fraud in France is the biggest they have ever seen. The big problem as a citizen is to find someone who will defend your interest. This is what I said earlier, is like you go and see a lawyer as if you were a patient seeing a surgeon. Same for the journalist. So if you have someone in front of you who's not an ethical person, because then you discover that lawyers themselves are not necessarily ethical people, which is another shock, you know. So nowadays this is public because people like me talk. But 10 or 12 years ago, you know, you were going to justice because justice is supposed to be ethical and fair. You don't know anything about that. Now, I have a lawyer who explained very clearly that, you know, if the two of us have a car accident or if we are neighbors and we have a water leak, justice is really fair. Justice will say, I am the guilty one, I must owe you whatever it is for damage. But a case like mine, justice is somehow unable, because I have been to court, I think 7 times, for the fine that is the biggest ever, and somehow I had to fight the government to recognize that I had been working with it, so I'm not somehow a whistleblower, I am a customs informant. And this is very different, because it enters a law that says that the people informing the Ministry of Finances for frauds are supposed to get a retribution. So, you know, I am somehow a student in law. I am learning, because you have civil law, you have financial laws, you have administrative law, you have, it never stops. It's not only a one way or a one window, it's all the windows are open, somehow for your case to be sent from one court to another. It's called a business. And there's your life in the middle, and this is it.
I think there's a question here in the front on the left.
Yes, I would be interested from both of you. I mean, we were talking, or you described how you were affected, I mean, negatively affected by what you did. Are there also any positive effects? Like, I mean, I could imagine that since you're well known, wouldn't companies offer you a job, or maybe as an employee or not, also to profit from your reputation as a whistleblower? I mean, or is that never happened?
As far as can you hear me? As far as I'm concerned, as I said earlier, I left the bank in February 2012. So I've been without incomes for 7.5 years, which means on one side paying lawyers, on one side being unable to pay the house rent. So the whole of your life goes away. What makes you a citizen is what? Is you have a job, so you have money to pay your rent, so you can raise your kids, so you can plan going on holidays, then you can change jobs, get a promotion, and then life goes on. With a case like mine, justice is the first element of the retaliation, with the government being the first one, you know, not respecting the laws. So how can you explain that anyone and everyone on the planet is able to contact me? I'm here in Berlin today. It's because someone got my name or saw me somewhere. And like all the headhunters and all the companies who are, especially multinational companies, they are obliged nowadays in France to talk about economic and social responsibility. They are supposed to be the first ones coming to me. Well, I mean, when I say me, and other whistleblowers who have been kicked out. And somehow they're the first ones who hide our stories. They don't want that. This is what I said earlier. It's as if we are in a movie, and then everyone clicks on the remote control, and then everyone has their own life. So what is it for any of you to be without incomes for 7.5 years? What is it? You have no life. As our president, Mr. Macron, said one day, you go to the train stations and you meet people who are no ones. It's awfully violent, but this is exactly the way we are treated. We are nobodies. So we can only we can only applaud with the John Doe story, because we don't know who he is, or who she is, or who they are. And this is exactly it. Behind a whistleblower, you have someone's life. And we have the case of Chelsea Manning, who's back in jail. We have the case of Snowden, who is in Russia, as you all know. We have I talked to you about Assange earlier today. There is not a happy whistleblower who blah, blah, blah. It's not true. It's not true. And I was stupid or naive enough to think that it was only in France, because France is a country where one doesn't talk, and that in the other countries it would be better. But read my book, I left it at the entrance. The whistleblowers in Germany, it's a catastrophe. I went to the Bundestag 3 years ago and explained to one of your member of parliaments what it was like to be a whistleblower. She'd never heard about that. She had heard about the UBS fraud in Germany, because UBS had to pay a 300 million fine here 3 years ago. You go to Spain, you go to Italy, you go to Switzerland, which is a neutral country with all the multinational companies. Well, all the ones blowing the whistle in Switzerland, the finance industry, prison. Prison. It's supposed to be the neutral democracy of the world. We all have heard that. So no, this is not true. We're totally abandoned by the companies, by the headhunters, and by our governments.
Pauline, any positives that you can draw from your experience?
I have been working for Deutsche Welle now as a freelancer, as a contributor. And in Turkey, there is no headline media for critical journalists. And I am a correspondent working on finance and economic issues. And now Berat Albayrak is economy minister of Turkey. And so any media outlets can give me a job in Turkey. And of course, I don't want to work with them also. And I am a freelancer, as I said, and I can work some Turkish websites. But there is economic crisis in Turkey, and there is no good economic conditions. So many journalists now can do their job as a freelancer in Turkey.
Very practical question to Stephanie. So you mentioned that when they came to you and asked you to delete all the files in your computer, you're really shocked and surprised because you didn't know that something could potentially be wrong, or that you're doing anything that could be illegal, right? So one of the things we have been calling on banks to do is to train their staff, right? So they should, everyone who works in a bank, directly or not directly with a client, should know what is the bank allowed or not allowed to do, what are anti-money laundering obligations, and so on and so forth. So after this happened, and you were still in the bank for a while, did anything change in the bank? Did you see any change that the bank were actually training their staff, or anything that you can tell us?
I said it before during my speech. I explained that as of when I blew the whistle, as an elected member of the personnel, they changed all the procedures. They changed the compliance book. They changed the practices of the bank, which was that, for example, foreign bankers couldn't meet their clients in the bank premises anymore, etc., etc. Yeah, they did. Of course they did. But then the customs told me that fraud was continuing. And I was the first one shocked, because I said, no, I mean, this happened and I'm suffering enough. So it was very interesting, by the way, because we did a work trying to know how it would work. It was very interesting. Because it continues. I mean, do not think that it's because we're in 2019 and that there are all these media talking about it that fraud has stopped. What bankers explained to me is that 10, 12 years ago, it was countries like Switzerland, where on one side you had banks, and on the other side you had governments, which were stable democracies. Nowadays, 12 years later, as they've moved the bank accounts with a click of a mouse, the jurisdictions, the countries where the accounts are in countries where the state, the head of state and the banker is the same person, which makes things even more difficult, because it's on one side money laundering and money darkening. So it's a big washing machine, yeah.
Any more questions? Come back to you. Yeah.
One more question. How do you comment, what's your opinion on the recent EU regulation in order to protect whistleblowers? Are you satisfied or not with that?
You're talking about the law passed 2 weeks ago at the Parliament? Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks ago, but very good. I mean, it's very good to have laws that somehow are supposed to protect citizens. We have this law in France since 2016, and people like me, who were exactly what the law says, like to talk to your hierarchy and to the top management, and then to fill in a complaint, or then talking to people outside, somehow blow the whistle externally. It's exactly what I did. And then the Ministry of Finances says, oh, but you're not a whistleblower. You are a witness we used in a case. So laws are extremely important as long as you have an ethical justice, because all the MEPs in Brussels explain the same. Down the road, at the end, it's a judge deciding whether it's a Belgian judge, a Turkish judge, a French judge, a German judge. Then the judge is responsible for the case. So, of course, the laws are very good, and we are happy to have contributed to that, because if we hadn't been so noisy around our cases, it wouldn't have raised so much awareness. And now, being a whistleblower is not something easy, because obviously your phone is being tracked, obviously you are being followed. I had no time to talk about it. I wrote a whole book about my story. My first book is absolutely crazy. Each time I was sitting in a restaurant or I was somewhere, there was someone alone next to me. It was never the same person, you know. And then when this lady from the customs met me on the Champs-Élysées during the Roland Garros tournament, I said, but how are you going to recognize me? Don't know who you are. And she said, Mrs. Gibault, I've seen many photos of you. But you're like, so, you know, we are never alone. This is what I discovered, is like, obviously, a case like mine, and corruption cases, with links to our top politicians, goes in the hands of the secret services. So those guys are the ones who are on your back. And I heard by journalists that somehow in 2008 was given to the police, the finance police in France, the instruction to follow the ones who were against the practices of UBS, not the ones who were complying with the rules. So you're like, but who gives the instructions in my country? It's crazy. So laws, of course, definitely, as long as you have a very good lawyer who is able to identify the potential problems. My first lawyer read my first book, and it's the one being attacked, and I think it's 35 paragraphs, so it's a massive thing. So either the guy is totally corrupted and or totally unable to do his job properly. But, you know, it's once again, laws are good, but it's according to who surrounds you. And the big problem is anonymity. As long as we don't know who's behind a case, obviously this person cannot be retaliated, cannot be harassed. You know, my dog was poisoned in my apartment one night. Guys jumped on me at the corner of one street one night, you know, 4 guys, and one of them was like a sumo, you know. I was totally petrified. Who was there to help me? Is there a justice? Is there, you know, a law that says, because who entered my apartment without breaking the door? Who poisoned my dog in the apartment without breaking the door? It's crazy. What is this made for, you know? So it's pressures. And in my case, but in many other cases, the Ministry of Finances had to offer me a job. I could have been the best person in the world doing communication for the Ministry of Finances, cheating, you know, looking for tax evasion. Why don't they do that? What is the interest in keeping me in my situation? What is the interest in non-abiding the law? Because in my case, it's the French administration who does not abide. There's a guy who's supposed to write a check, then it changes my life, and I can go back to a normal life. Somehow it's so much cruelty. It's not even violence, it's cruelty. You are someone of the civil society, you're middle class, and like everyone, you have a family, you have friends, you have a job, you have incomes, so you have projects, so you are happy. You have your health problems, your family problems, the little problems. We have massive problems. You know, when you're a woman and you don't raise your kids anymore, what can be worse than that? When you have an animal in your apartment and your animal is being poisoned in your apartment, what can be worse than that? When you go to court to have your own rights being applied versus a government who says that they fight tax evasion, it does not make sense. And this is, I think, the big conclusion of all that. It does not make sense. They do not want whistleblowers anymore, because the more whistleblowers there are, obviously the most information circulates. Yesterday there was a gathering in Paris for Julian Assange in front of the embassy of Australia, and I listened to interviews this morning, and people were saying, but the fact that he still is in this embassy, alone, locked, in such a silence, is terrible for all of us, because somehow this leads to the fact that no one wants to talk anymore. And the retaliation is so terrible that we have to understand that retaliation against one is retaliation for all the others. Because tomorrow, if you are the next whistleblower at UBS, your case might be extremely similar to mine, even if the laws have evolved. And why? And the answer, we come back to Frederick and the ICIG and Süddeutsche Zeitung, is we have to gather to have our own interests respected. Because we all are down the road, it's a human question. What is it to live together? What is the truth? What's right? What's wrong? What is ethical? Are our governments ethical? Are our administrations ethical? What can we do all together? Silence is a violence. You know, in my book, I talk about 50 whistleblowers. No one had ever heard about them. You know, I was talking to you earlier about the German ones. And, you know, my blood froze, because it's true. I went to the Bundestag and no one had ever heard about what a whistleblower was 3 years ago. So thank you for being here, because you, little by little, are going to read, are going maybe to buy my books, and are going to think about what we can do together. But what the journalists are doing with the ICIG and the Panama Papers is exactly that. Never be alone to face something like what we face. Because obviously, we know, I'm not in Azerbaijan, in countries where you would be found dead. You know, we're talking about Daphne earlier. In France, it's a social death. Because obviously, if you have no incomes, then you have no money, then you don't see your family, that you don't have friends, that you don't have projects, then you are someone no one wants to be close to. And obviously, it's so violent. So the big thing is laws to protect people like me, like you, but it's also laws to take the other ones to jail and to prosecute them and to seize their wealth. You know, the Minister of Budget in France who was cheating taxes with UBS, he's not in jail. He plays golf every Thursday. Cool. So is it better to be this guy, or is it better to be me? And what is fair, what is unfair? What is ethical, what is not ethical? So it's philosophy questions, and it's also somehow wondering what historians will remember of our democracies at the beginning of the 21st century.
I have a question for both of you. One for Pauline, because I know that you were in a trial already the 28th of March, and I wanted to know, I mean, if you can explain a bit more to the audience what happened there, and also what are the trials that are still open for you, so we can also understand a bit more what is the actual state of your case. And then for Stephanie, I wanted to ask, since we were mentioning this whistleblower protection law that recently passed, do you think that that is going to change something, or what do you think still really needs to be done for whistleblowers to allow you to have a better life?
My cases is there were two cases about defamation, and one of them is Binali Yıldırım and Sons. And this court decision is now on appeal court, and there is no time schedule for it. We are waiting the final decision. In Turkey, there is no guarantee about that. It is due to jail management, because 13 months and 15 days in jail, normally I don't need to go to in jail and go to face in sentences. And but I don't know how many days I have to go. I have to be in jail. I have to stay in jail now. Maybe a few days, maybe 1 month or 2 months. We don't know about that. And the other case was about Berat Albayrak and his brother. And the same judge was there. And so we expected the same decision, because it was the same judge and the same accusation. But I was lucky for that, because the judge made a mistake. She dismisses the time. Normally, in 4 months, they have to prepare indictment for journalists. But she dismissed time, and so the charge against me dropped. And if she didn't forget this time, actually I will again face the same decision. And now I am waiting, and I am living in Turkey. And everyone sometimes they ask me, why are you living still? Why are you still living in Turkey? And in my opinion, I don't want to change my life because of that, because I used to my life and keep on doing something in my country. Some of journalists now are living out of Turkey because they want to live in democratic states. Maybe they are right, but in my opinion, we have to do something in our country for changing some things. And that's all what I can say. Thank you.
The question was about the law, right? The law in Brussels. I think what should also have been added, but maybe it's going to steps we're going to build later, is that companies and administration must have internal and external audits. This is rule number 1, because when I had the general manager of UBS behind me in 2010 saying, our accounts are being audited and she's a liar, well, down the road, the Ministry of Finances found 40,000 offshore accounts for an envelope of 12 billion euros. So there is something which apparently the auditors did not see. So I am extremely, I underline this because it's very important. For example, I've never been audited at UBS. Why not? I had budgets up to 5 million, 5, 6, 7 million a year. I mean, it's lots of money, to organize events. And as I said before, the law must provide prison sentences and the wealth despoilment. because if all the guys we have been seeing for 2 days, they were in jail and without money, then it would be one of the reasons why people wouldn't follow suit. As long as they have impunity. You know, we had this minister of budget in Paris talking to the cameras and talking at the Assemblée Nationale, saying that he had never had, he swore that he'd never had. So if you are able to lie as much, it means you know you're going to have impunity somehow. So the laws are supposed to take those guys to jail and to despoil them. Obviously, I mean, it's my feeling, because otherwise it's only honest people like you and I who have an idea of what's right and what's wrong.
If there are no further questions, then please everybody join me in thanking once again Pele Nuncar and Stephanie Gibault for their presentations.
So I really wanted to thank all of you for this really important panel, and I also hope that what we discussed today, you know, will be heard from the people that need to hear, and also there will be some change. This is really the things we try to, you know, engage with, and also have as a hope for the future at the Disruption Lab. So I really wanted to thank you. And now I am here with Lieke to give a little announcement for the future. So it's okay, otherwise you're getting, you know, thank you. Hopefully we wouldn't be too long, but we wanted to announce what is going to happen tomorrow, and also what will happen in the future of the Disruption Lab. So you would start.
Yeah, I will talk a bit. Well, you already heard probably the artistic talk today by rybn.org. So tomorrow they're going to do a workshop with a selected group of people. Unfortunately, it is sold out. So it is a workshop about their offshore tour operator. So this is the psychogeographic GPS prototype that they developed, which they showed earlier in the rucksack. So people will be using this to take a walk through Berlin and find some locations that are in the database of the Panama Papers, and so the physical traces of the offshore banking. And for all of you that cannot join the workshop but are curious, like what's going to happen or what we will discover, we will actually also be discussing the results and the things people found in the next community meetup. So this will be happening on the 17th of April at the State Studio, which is in Schöneberg. So we will spend some time during this meetup also to discuss what we actually found. And then I'll hand over to Tatjana again to talk about other events that will be happening this year.
Yes, I mean, we don't go into really the details because, as you imagine, to build up each event takes a lot of time. So we cannot already present you the next program, but we can briefly say what we are going to work on the following events. And as I say, we will always work in partnership also with Transparency International. The next event will be in June 14 and 15, and we will work on the inequality of AI. So as everybody now, we also want to try to put our head into the discourse of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And at the same time, the form of inequalities that also machine creates, especially if we speak about racial discriminations and also other kind of discrimination related to gender, class, and so on. Then in September 20 and 21st, we will have another event that is related to citizen journalism, so in a sense really connect to the one we just experience in these 2 days, but we want to analyze the situations in which the citizens, the normal people, are somehow doing the work of the truth tellers by helping journalists and also researchers, other people that want to engage in a revealing form of misconducts, and we also want to involve people that are really good in technical terms, that are also creating tools for enabling this form of grassroots whistleblowing, if you want. And then in November, we will have the community conference.
Yeah, so I'll briefly, I
There
don't
is
need
nothing
to,
really.
no, there's nothing yet. So this is all to be developed during the year. So actually in the end of the year, so on the end of November, we will have our final event of the year, which is called Activation, and which is not a regular conference, but a sort of community gathering. So as I said before, we have this community meetups happening now before and after each conference. And at these meetups, we also look at the topics that are discussed in the main conference. So we had one meetup already about the dark havens, offshore tax evasion, and we have another one coming. And we will use these meetups and what we discuss there to prepare the program in November. So in November, we will have input on each of the 3 topics throughout the year, but from the community perspective. So everybody is also invited to join these meetups and share your ideas, because we really want to develop this also together with the community that is around the Disruption Network Lab. And this we will then use in the activation conference to close off the year together with the final reflection on these topics.
And we will do the conferences always here at the Studio One, and the community conference too, but the activation meetups will be at the State Studio in Schöneberg. And so now we arrive at the end of our conference. Okay, there is still the workshop tomorrow, but you know, it's the end of the talk program. So first, I really want to thank all the speakers. The last panel was really wonderful, and you know, we really put our heart into that. And I really thank you for this, because you know, I know so much you struggle every day for the things you do. And we want to thank all the speakers of today and the speaker of yesterday's, and then we want to thank our team. So I will do now a list of thanks, so don't get too bored, but also this is really important. Daniela Silvestrin, Nada Bacher, Monty Harmony as project managers, and Jonas Franchi, the visual designers, and also the crazy tweet person that has been tweeting forever in these days and before. No, not really crazy tweet person, but I mean, he used very active because he used Twitter in a really, you know, engaged way. Then Joe Haveman for the SPR manager. And I want to thank Elisabeth Enke for the wonderful sounds technician work. Thank you, Elisabeth. And Thorsten, also, that is working at our technology support. Then Angel, Gonzalo, and Gabriel, that are our video team. Maria Silvano for the photo. Where is Maria? I don't see her, but over there, you're in front of me. And the streaming Boiling Heads, thank you. And the volunteers that have been working with us, Giacomo Marinsalta, and also Lauren De Carli, that is helping us with the editorial tasks. And finally, the helpers that are building up the space and taking it down, and the cash desk helper, Giorgio. So I think we say them all, hopefully. And so we will meet tomorrow for the people that will be at the workshop, and please come back middle June here, and you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, all the platform that we don't like so much, but still we have to use them. And of course, in a week or a bit more, there will be the videos of the talks. Thank you very much.